scale of 1 to Milton, how humble art thou?
The poem that we'll be reading today is London, 1802, by William Wordsworth. He was born in Cockermouth, Cumbria, England, and studied at Hawkshead Grammar School, and his mother died when he was just 8 years old. Before we read the poem, here are some definitions to words that might be unfamiliar to you. Fen is a marshland. A dower is a widow's share for life of her husband's estate. Stagnant means not moving. In the context of the poem, a bower means summer house or country cottage.
London, 1802. Milton, thou shouldest be living at this hour. England hath need of thee. She is a fen of stagnant waters. Altar, sword, and pen. Fireside. The heroic wealth of hall and bower have forfeited their ancient English dower of inward happiness. We are selfish men. Oh, raise us up and return to us again, and give us manners, virtue, freedom, power. Thy soul was like a star, and dwelt apart. Thou hadst a voice whose sound was like the sea, pure as the naked heavens, majestic, free. Thou didst thou travel on life's common way in cheerful godliness, and yet thy heart the lowliest duties on herself did lay.
This poem is a Petrarchan sonnet, which means that the first 8 lines of the poem present a problem, and the last 6 propose a solution. The problem in this poem is that England gave up inward happiness for greed, and the solution is to use Milton's lessons in order to restore England back to its virtuous ways. This poem is an iambic pentameter, so it has 5 pairs of unstressed and stressed syllables, as seen in the picture. The speaker of the poem is the author, Wordsworth, who is a man that idolizes Milton and is critical of England's current state. The situation is that England has abandoned their virtues and have turned to satisfying their own selfish desires. Wordsworth is speaking to Milton, the author of Paradise Lost, and the setting is London, 1802. The theme of this poem is that William Wordsworth uses Milton as the guiding force for the people of England, who are imprisoned by their selfishness and lack of manners, freedom, power, and virtue. He says this with a reminiscent but desperate tone. This poem uses parallel structure to create a mirror between the people of England and what they lack. You can see this in lines 3, 4, and 8, that the altar, sword, pen, fireside, the heroic wealth of hall and bower are the ones who are lacking manners, virtue, freedom, and power. In the poem, Wordsworth uses words such as stagnant, selfish, fen, forfeited, and a need to describe England, which presents a negative connotation, while he describes Milton as having power, manners, virtue, freedom, majesty, purity, and cheerful godliness. These words give Milton a very positive connotation and present him as an idealistic figure. Wordsworth uses personification to illustrate England as a singular person in need of help. You can see this in line 2 where he says,
England hath need of thee. She is a fen.
Wordsworth also uses 3 consecutive similes to describe Milton's majestic attributes in lines 9 through 11, where he says,
Thy soul was like a star and dwelt apart. Thou hadst a voice whose sound was like the sea, pure as the naked heavens.
He uses an apostrophe, which is an exclamation addressed to an unpresent audience. This can be seen in line 1, where he says,
Milton!
Synecdoche is when a part is represented as a whole, and it can be seen in lines 13 through 14 when he says,
And yet thy heart the lowliest duties on herself did lay.
He uses a metaphor in lines 2 through 3 when he says,
She is a fan of stagnant waters.
Metonymy is when you represent an idea with a closely associated item, such as in lines 3 to 4.
Altar, sword, and pen, fireside, the heroic wealth of hall and bower.
This quote is basically a symbol for the church clergy, army, riders, domestic workers, and the noblemen. Basically, a representation of all of England. Another symbol is Milton himself, the author of Paradise Lost. He represents England's idealistic state. Wordsworth uses 5 of the romantic characteristics, the first of which being the humble life represented by lines 13 through 14 when he says,
"And yet thy heart the lowliest duties on herself did lay."
The second is nature. He uses this in lines 9 and 10 when he says,
"Thy soul was like a star."
And also in line 10,
"A voice whose sound was like the sea."
The third romantic characteristic he uses is feeling. We can see examples of this in line 6 where he says,
"We are selfish men."
and also in line 13 where he describes Milton.
"Cheerful godliness."
The past is another romantic characteristic that he uses, as seen in line 1 where he says,
"Milton, thou shouldest be living at this hour."
The fifth and final romantic characteristic he uses is the supernatural, shown in lines 11,
"Pure as the naked heavens."
as well as in line 13 where he says,
"Cheerful godliness."
Here's a review of what we just learned.
"Milton, thou shouldest be living at this hour. England hath need of thee. She is a fen of stagnant waters. Altar, sword, and pen, fireside, the heroic wealth of Holland Bower, have forfeited their ancient English dower of inward happiness. We are selfish men. Oh, raise us up, return to us again, and give us manners, virtue, freedom, power. Thy soul was like a star, and dwelt apart. Thou hadst a voice whose sound was like the sea, pure as the naked heavens, majestic, free. So didst thou travel on life's common way, in cheerful godliness, and yet thy heart the lowliest duties on herself did lay."